much more complex emotional and cognitive world than we used to think they did. So what about cognition? Processing of mental information. You know that rats have metacognition, that is they know what they know and they know what they don't know, and this clever little experiment was designed to show that. A rat who knows the answer to a easy question will just push a lever, get the answer right, and get a treat, a nice, pretty sizable treat for that. If they're not sure, if it's a difficult question, if they get it wrong, by the way, they get no treats. If it's a difficult question, they have a third option, which is to stick their nose in a cone or some other thing, and that means abort this question, let's go to the next one. They get a very small treat for that. It's better than nothing. It's not as good as getting it right, but I'd rather get a small treat by saying, essentially, I don't know, let's go to the next one, than to get nothing. So it's a clever little study design. Once again, it's being tested in other animals, and some other animals have shown this too. And it's called metacognition. It's considered to be a pretty high cognitive capacity, and a sense of awareness of one's own knowledge. We tend to be a bit discriminatory against small rodents for whatever reason. We love to categorize things as small rodents are thought of as sort of lower mammals, primates, as the higher mammals, despite how we treat them. But yet these little meadow voles, there's probably 10,000 meadow voles within a few square miles of here. These are very common rodents, successful rodents live under the grasses in North America, across North America. And they have what's called episodic memory, as do scrub jays. And that is they can remember the what, when, and the where of a past event. To study with scrub jays, for instance, this is a caching species, they bury food like squirrels do, and the way you study, they studied this episodic memory in these birds was, these were captive birds, they had an opportunity to bury peanuts on one side of it, on one arena with sand on day one, say 9 o'clock this morning. And just a little background, peanuts they're liked by the jays, but waxworms, which they had an opportunity to bury a little bit later on this side in another arena, they prefer food. They prefer the waxworms to peanuts if they're given the choice. However, peanuts have a longer shelf life. They last longer. Waxworms become rotten and unpalatable in about 5 days. And depending on when they tested the birds later to have access to both arenas to get the food out, the birds made a selective choice. So if it had been just a few hours since they buried the peanuts, then they would choose, you can guess which side they go to the waxworm side. They prefer those, and it's only been a few hours. But if they test them, they don't wear watches, but they obviously keep track of time. If they test them more than 5 days later, they will not go to the waxworms, they will go to the side where the peanuts are. Even, scientists need to account for possible other explanations. Maybe they just smell bad, and they're just not going to have that. Even when the scientists replaced the rotten waxworms with fresh ones and fresh sand, they still went to the peanut side. So they're not using the sense of smell as a cue in this particular case. They're using their memory. So they're keeping track of what's buried, where, and how long ago, what, where, when. We can add who, by the way, to scrub jays, because it turns out they're very socially aware. There's a thing called audience effects where you're cued into who's maybe watching you. And if a scrub jay knows he or she's being watched when they bury the food, they will typically come back a short time later to move it. Why is that? You can guess, if you're cynical enough, they steal from each other. However, naive young birds that have never stolen from anyone else have to learn the hard way. They won't move the food because they haven't learned the hard way yet. Once they've been stolen from, once they've stolen themselves, they will always move their own food if they know they're being watched. So it takes a thief to know one. This is a hooded warbler, lovely little warbler down in eastern North America. They migrate several thousand miles, pretty amazing. They come back exactly the plot of land they had their territory on previous years as a male, and they reestablish the same territory, usually, if they can, and they usually can. We're talking maybe half an acre of land. Again, like the bats, a dot on the map, and they have this remarkable homing ability. I think we should admire them for that alone. However, a series of playback studies show that they're very tuned in and have a very good memory of their neighbors. So, just to use human terms, let's say Bill is over here and Joe's over there. This is the main territory holder in the middle, and Bill's territory is here and Joe's on that side. And if you do playbacks at Bill's call or Joe's call, the bird is not freaked out at all. If you play back a call of Stuart, whose territory is a couple of miles that way, this bird will be very agitated, not happy. That doesn't fit the expectation. And by the way, they're remembering these calls from year to year. So if you record Bill's call from last year and play it the next year, this guy, territory holder here, will be okay with that. provided you play it on this side. If you take Bill's call and you play it over here, not happy. What? Bill's territory isn't on this side. He lives on the other side of my house, kind of thing. It's a little bit like us. I guess we'd be a little bit nonplussed and concerned if we started seeing our neighbors walking out of the wrong house. Maybe that wouldn't bother us, but it really troubles them. Studies on fish show the same phenomenon. These fish have sounds that they make, obviously communicative in function, or at least they seem to be. And if you play back those sounds on the sides of this damselfish's territory, they're cool with that if it's on the right side. If you take the playback of the fish's call from that side and play it on this side of the territory, they get all agitated. They're not happy about that. So the same kind of phenomenon. Because they're fish, we're often inclined to interpret it in a different way. Wow, it's just instinct or whatever. I think we should be very open to it. It's the same kind of behavior, the same kind of complexity. It appears to be the same kind of phenomenon going on as we find in that hooded warbler. By the way, the fish is a bigger animal. I don't know how their brains compare, but we often think about brain size. And yet, bigger or smaller people aren't necessarily lesser or more intelligent. So I don't know why the size of the brain is such a big deal. This is a still photograph from another fish, obviously, a parrotfish who is doing tool use, which is something that long ago fell off the list of things that were unique to humans, and that list has been dwindling. But fishes were not considered to be tool users until relatively recently. And you can watch YouTube videos of fishes doing various pretty sophisticated behavior that involves planning. In this case, this fish has blown water onto the sand to expose a shellfish, a little clam here, grabs the clam, carries it a long way, swims over to a rock, and presumably this fish knows where the rock is and has used it before as instead of an anvil, and then proceeds to slam this unfortunate shellfish against the rock to break it open with a series of very rapid head flicks. There's other fish that swim on vertically when they do this, so it's a sideways move of the head. This one does it this way. So you could even argue maybe even cultural phenomena. Definitely fish have been shown to have culture. Culture simply means, I don't mean to simplify it, it's pretty cool, but it's a behavior that's not genetically coded, it's learned by observation and it's passed on through different populations, so you expect to see different types of behaviors across different populations. And that's a sort of cultural phenomenon, and it's being shown in fishes. But we can say, well, that's pretty cool, but I have metacognition, I have episodic memory, I have tool use, I plan. What about cognitive skills that exceed our own? And there are examples. In fact, there are probably many. The scrub jay, the squirrels that bury food at specific locations. Squirrels and scrub jays, if they had crap memories, random array, and then they were replaced by a white rectangle, and their task is to point to the rectangles in the order of the numbers 1 to 9. If they get to 9, they get a little whistle or a nice sound, they get a little treat. If they get to 4 and then go 7, they get a buzzer and they get no treat. So then they go to the next trial. So they don't do this all day. This is not really vivisection. These animals have a pretty rich life, albeit a captive one. And what was I going to say? I forget. Anyway, they're very good at it. And they don't get much time to see the numbers. And I'm going to just give you an example. So you're going to see the numbers 1 to 9 flash on the screen for 1 second. And imagine that you're in front of the screen and you're going to point to the rectangles after they're replaced. And you'll see it's not an easy task. Most human adults would maybe get to 3 if they're having a good day. Young kids will do a little bit better. But chimpanzees like a human here will get to 9. If it's 1 second, which is what you just saw, they get to 9 every time. And if they have 1/5 of a second, which is about that long, they get to 9 about 90% of the time. So they're just really, really very good at it. In fact, the best memory of Britain, a guy named Ben Pridmore, can memorize the order of a shuffled deck of cards in 30 seconds. He went up against the human, one of the more accomplished chimps at this, and he did about 1/3 as well. So they're just better at it. So it's an example of sort of a raw intelligence skill that they can do better. We can speculate on what it is about their biology that makes them so good at this, but they're certainly good at it. And there are probably many other cognitive skills that animals have that exceed ours. I'll give one more example here involving fish again. This is frillfin goby. They live in rock pools at low tide, and they sometimes jump between rock pools, perhaps when a predator or bird lands and it's a dangerous place, they better get out of there, or if it's drying up. But if you think about that, jumping from one rock pool to another, how do you know which direction to jump? How do you know how far to jump? I mean, that's, most of the time you're going to be landing on the rocks and perish. So it behooves a frillfin goby to know which way to jump to avoid making a leap of faith, literally and metaphorically. And a scientist did a series of studies in the early 70s to find out how they did this. How did they know how to do this? It turns out they memorized the topography of these tide pools at high tide when the water's in, and so they can swim over it. So it's pretty amazing. They're converting a sort of a radial geometry view to a sort of horizontal one where they can't actually see that. And I don't believe they skyhop. I don't think they go up to look around. Well, that'd be pretty cool too. But they have this ability, so they can jump from pool A to pool C to the biggest, deepest pool to get through the evaporation of the water or to get away from the predator. And they do it by memory. It's something I haven't tried it, but I think I'd struggle to do that, to sort of convert this radial memory, this radial map to a horizontal map, a different sort of dimension. And by the way, they can do it with just one trial, just one experience of swimming over, they can make this accurately. Pretty amazing ability. I'm not suggesting that a Frillfin goby, would outscore a human on an IQ test. Of course, that's a human IQ test. If Frillfin gobies made IQ tests, we would not do so well on their tests. But it's just an example of something that's useful to them, not something particularly useful for us, and they're very good at it, and probably better than we would be. So a study of awareness in elephants. Very clever, simple, a little bit bizarre. Scientists sometimes do strange things to probe the inner lives of animals. And we know these are long-lived, large-brained, highly social animals. They live in matriarchal groups. Males wander off in their teens to sort of be solitary and eventually try and work their way up the hierarchy there and try and get sexual favors with the cows. But in any event, females stay together, and the oldest, biggest females tend to be the leaders. They have the knowledge that's being accumulated, the cultural knowledge. They know that there's a marula tree that's going to be in fruit, 5 miles this way, and so they know to go. They go, or there's a watering hole, or what have you. They're big animals, need a lot of resources, so they often walk long distances. Well, they keep tabs on other elephants. They're highly social, they seem to know each other, and there are other family groups in the area, and they seem to know those as well. And they're probably some genetic related through the males who wander off. So what the scientists did in one study, they found that if you take fresh urine, and just to back up a little bit, urine for a lot of mammals is sort of like a business card. It's like their version of here's my information. It contains a lot of information. By the way, don't try this at conferences. I've tried using urine as a way of getting my business card. It's a failure. For them, it really works very well. And it's surprising how much information is in. Some of the information in there is actually not really desirable. You don't want to give away how many parasites you have and that sort of thing. And yet mice could actually have been shown experimentally to be able to gauge the parasite load of another mice based on its urine. And they know sex, reproductive status, age, amazing stuff. So once again, this is something we're not really very good at. Anyway, you take fresh urine. Elephants use urine as sort of an identifier. You take fresh urine from an elephant, he's walking, say, a quarter mile ahead, and then you just quickly redeposit it. This is the control sample. When these elephants get there, they check it out. They sniff it, and they move on their way. But if you take fresh urine from an elephant who's walking a quarter mile back here, and you surreptitiously trundle it around and up front and deposit it in the sand or the ground up ahead, when they encounter that fresh urine, they spend more time. They twist their trunk, they sort of look around. The scientists sort of essentially described it as surprise. And really, it's because it doesn't fit expectation. If you're keeping mental tabs, you know that Uncle Johnny or Auntie Joanne or whatever, who's walking back there, why am I smelling her, why is her fresh business card right here? And they know she's walking behind me, whereas they're not so nonplussed or surprised when it's from an elephant. They know he's walking ahead. So it's a clever little way to show that elephants are keeping mental tabs on other elephants. And it's thought that an elephant is keeping mental tabs on 30 or so other elephants at any one time. Another form of awareness is self-awareness. And the holy grail test of self-awareness in an animal is the mirror self-recognition test, where you put a dot on the animal such that the animal presumably doesn't know the dot is there, and then you put plonk them in front of the mirror and see what they do. And if they threaten the mirror or go behind the mirror, or like my cat does when I play catnip video at home, they sometimes go behind the TV to see where are those birds. It suggests that they may not recognize that what's in the mirror is the reflection of themselves, but if the animal tries to remove the mark, then it's a pretty robust test or demonstration of that's me, I recognize that that's me, self-recognition. And until 2008, only great apes, dolphins, I guess dolphins, probably whales, but they're not so easily tested, and elephants had passed the neuro self-recognition test. And then a German research team tried it on magpies, and it was a very small study. Only 3 birds were used, but only 5 were used. But I think 3 of the 5 passed the test. They immediately, when they saw their reflection, they very soon started to try and remove this yellow dot, whereas birds with the black dot, the control group, didn't try and remove the dot. It was camouflaged, and they couldn't feel it there. And so it's an example of what suggests that this corvid, the crow group, of which magpies are a member, they're generally regarded as quite intelligent and playful and a little bit cheeky and that sort of thing. They seem to have self-awareness. I do like to add, though, that failing this test doesn't necessarily mean that you lack a sense of self. Passing the test is pretty solid evidence that you do have a sense of self. And if you fail, it could be just it's not the best way to test it. Communication is a nice window into animals' inner lives. And prairie dogs have a fascinating alarm calling system, quite detailed, and there's actually a book coming out next month called Chasing Dr. Dolittle by an American scientist who studied prairie dogs for many years. And I've already read the book. It's great, and he really sticks his neck out among scientists because he's arguing that animals actually do have a true language. A lot of animals have a true language, not just a communication system, but syntax, placing the sounds, words he would call them, in the right order. And prairie dogs, not only do they have a series of very definitive calls to define hawk versus eagle or snake or black-footed ferret, dog, domestic dog, coyote, human with gun, they modify calls to indicate that this is the one who carries the gun, and they did that by having someone discharge a shotgun into the ground near the colony 5 days in a row, and by the end of 5 days they'd modified their call for this particular human, and when he walked through, even if he didn't have a gun, they were much more circumspect and more likely to take cover and make this special call. And they modify the call. They modify calls for different colors, green, blue, yellow, etc. I don't know, it's not known what that's about, why they're doing that. So it's much more nuanced and sophisticated than we used to think. Chickens, often dismissed them as sort of dim-witted birds with their bird brain. By the way, the bird brain was completely redefined by scientists about 5 years ago to get rid of the old terminology. Birds don't have a neocortex. They don't have that big sort of convoluted cauliflower part of the brain that mammals have. And so for that reason we thought they were just stupid. And it turns out that their paleocortex, the old brain, has evolved independently to endow them with the same kind of cognitive functions that we use our neocortex for. Evolution finds different solutions to problems. Chickens have, as I say, about 30 vocalizations, and one of them is a call that only roosters make, and it's intended for hens. It's called a come hither call or a food solicitation call. If a rooster finds, they're omnivorous, if a rooster finds a little morsel like a grasshopper or a beetle or something that is quite nice, he may eat it himself, but if there's a hen nearby, and only if there's a hen nearby, he may make this call. Essentially, it's a call that says, come on over, I found something nice. And so the hen comes running and he shows where it is, and if she finds it and you're cynical enough, you know that he's probably buying credit to be traded in for perhaps some other benefit at a later time. And it's usually at a later time, which means you're talking about memory and individual recognition. However, it gets a little more Machiavellian than that. Sometimes he'll make this call when there's nothing there. He hasn't found any cricket. But he sees there's a hen over there, and she's far enough away. And by the way, studies have shown, they measure the distance, and they've shown that they won't make this call deceptively if the hen's too close. So if she's far enough away, he'll make this call sometimes when there's nothing there. So she comes running over, well, he does his usual thing. Grasshoppers can jump, so it's a way to buy some credit on the cheap, if you like, without incurring any cost to himself. So it's pretty complicated. However, hens are equally perceptive to roosters as roosters are, and if he cheats and he's an inveterate liar and cheater, they'll soon learn that he's not worth responding to. So there's actually a very important message in there about social behavior and the virtues of living socially, is that it doesn't pay to be wrong or to cheat and lie, generally speaking. I mean, if everyone, let's just say everyone was a liar, everyone was not giving accurate information, what would we do? We would soon ignore everybody because it didn't mean anything, didn't have any traction. And so the cheaters and the liars, the criminals in society, they're a minority, and they prey off the fact that most people are honest most of the time. And so there's a lesson in there about virtue in nature, and that virtue tends to predominate and prevail, and cheating and lying tends to be relatively rare. Deception is quite widespread in animals, by the way, but